All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon, and in this video, we're going to talk about another update on the Terence Crawford Errol Spence Jr. fight. Stephen Espinoza, the president of Showtime, gives his input and lets us know where it is. And man, come on, bud, come on, bud, come on, bud. Let's make it happen. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. It is your boy Fanon. We are back talking boxing this morning. Well, we're doing this video in the morning, but we're back talking boxing. Terence Crawford, Errol Spence Jr., the biggest fight in boxing right now, from what I can see. Hopefully we'll be getting this fight. Stephen Espinoza, who's the president of Showtime, the network that is most likely to air it, gives his 2 cents on where the negotiations are right now and confirms pretty much what you've been hearing on a consistent basis about what needs to take place in order to make this fight. And that is for Terence Crawford to be, quote unquote, his words, not mine, Stephen Espinoza's words, not mine, to be reasonable in making the fight. Now, before we get into that, though, let me welcome you back to the channel. If you are a longtime subscriber, thank you so much for your support in the channel. If you are new to the channel, please accept my invitation to hit that subscribe button, hit that bell icon so you can be notified of when we release more videos and when we have more of these boxing conversations, which we do on a daily basis. So there's always plenty of people to talk to in the comment section. Take advantage, man, take advantage. All right, so Stephen Espinoza is very blunt. It says, look, is this a big fight? Yes. Is this Floyd Mayweather Jr. versus Manny Pacquiao? No. So what is the problem in making the fight? If people want to make Floyd Mayweather Jr., Manny Pacquiao money, the fight is not going to happen. And he says that that there is a chance the fight can be made, that there is a better chance than it used to be, and that as long as the parties are reasonable, that is where that the fight should be able to be made. And he said that is where they are right now, trying to find out how they can actually, on the business side of it, make the fight affordable, make it a situation where they can make money on the fight. Now, so who is he talking to? Most obviously, it is Terence Crawford, and Terence Crawford being reasonable and making less money than what he would otherwise want to make. Now, why would that be a problem with Terence Crawford or Errol Spence Jr. for the fight? Because it is such a big fight among hardcore boxing fans. It is such a tough fight between the competitors. So in order to maximize, to get, in a career-defining fight, you want a career-defining payday for a career-defining fight. And that is just very, very reasonable on the part of Terence Crawford, on the part of Errol Spence Jr. However, the problem is that there's nothing in the back of it. There's nothing, and by that I mean nothing looking backwards, that would say that this fight is going to be a gigantic fight. And why? A gigantic fight in the sense of the amount of money made. And why is that? Because of, well, 2 things. One, they have the same fan base. Between Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr., that is essentially the same fan base. It is Black American fighters, fans by and large, because that's the same demographic that they appeal to. That's who's in the conversations, in the YouTube videos, in the comment sections of different blogs. Those are the people that are talking about Errol Spence Jr., Terence Crawford, and that is the essential fan base of the two. So to use the example of peanut butter and chocolate making Reese's peanut butter cups, this is chocolate and chocolate. You get just a chocolate bar, right? You're combining, and I'm using, I know somebody else would use that. I might have got on them about that, but you get my point. So there's not a diverse fan base that you can count on to buy the fight. Now, why I mean count on to buy the fight, that's pointing to the other problem that Terence Crawford has not done particularly, has not excelled in pay-per-view. He's excelled in the ring, but in the business aspect of the fight, he has not excelled in that type of situation. Now, so what Steven Espinoza is saying is we're trying to find a way where people are going to be reasonable and, because they're not going to pour. And that is telling you that Showtime, who would be the person guaranteeing the money, is not going to pour a ton of money in that. Now, you can also look at it like this from Showtime's perspective, because people will say, well, you guaranteed Canelo Alvarez $40 million. You dedicated $100 million to Canelo Alvarez in a series of fights, right? With David Benavidez or Errol Spence Jr. or with Jamal Charlo, number one, and then Errol Spence Jr. and David Benavidez for the second fight. Well, if you look at that, first of all, you can look back and say, well, what have the numbers looked like in the past for Canelo Alvarez? And right there, you have the biggest name, you have the biggest draw in boxing, right off the cuff, right? And so people would say, well, you got this money for Canelo and those fights, why don't you have it for Errol and Terence? Well, number one, that's the biggest draw in boxing. Neither Terence Crawford or Errol Spence Jr. are the biggest draw in boxing. They're not. The HBO also had the same, from my understanding. I'm not sure. Yeah, it was HBO. Showtime rather. It was Showtime. Showtime also several years ago had $50 million. I assume that was them through the PBC. Had $50 million to give Anthony Joshua to fight Deontay Wilder because they were not going to pay Deontay Wilder the $50 million. They were going to pay Anthony Joshua the $50 million to make the Anthony Joshua-Deontay Wilder fight. Why? Because Anthony Joshua was one of the biggest draws in boxing. Deontay Wilder, make sure I said that right. Anthony Joshua was one of the biggest draws in boxing. Deontay Wilder is their biggest draw. They bring that over to Showtime. There's a ton of new subscriptions for Showtime. It does a bunch of pay-per-view buys. They could be very willing to take that chance in that regard because it has the potential of being that big. Well, when you have Errol Spence Jr. who does, just use the conservative, I'm going to split the difference between, and say 350, 400,000 pay-per-views, and you've got Terence Crawford, who does 100,000, 120,000, whatever that is, pay-per-views, and it's in the same demographic, then they're going to say, look, well, how much am I willing to risk on this fight based off what was earned before? And also, what is the commitment of Terence Crawford to fight on my network again? If Terence Crawford wins this fight, what is Terence Crawford going to do? Is Terence Crawford going to take the 4 belts and go off and fight somebody else? And then that's it. We lose the welterweight division and that's it. From a business standpoint, they would have to, consider all these things. And like I've done videos before, I was like, man, any way you cut this from the profit and loss statements that they can look at on previous fights for Terence Crawford and the testimony of Bob Arum, like they're going to be like, man, this thing looks like it's going to lose money. If we pay Errol his usual amount of money and then we give Terence Crawford even what his usual amount of money is, the fight would lose money. And so they risk losing their biggest name, biggest draw fighter, right? And risk losing money. It's going to be a very, very tough thing. And that's what Steven Espinoza is pointing to. And also Steven Espinoza, again, doesn't sound any different than he did months ago. When he said, yeah, well, there's a better chance of making the fight now than there was before. And that's because Bob Arum wasn't involved. His tone was the exact same thing. Well, there's a better chance of making it than there was before. But, we're not going to be paying all this money and cats got to be reasonable. That's where it looks like that stuff is, man. So, hey, man, Bud's gonna have to take a paycheck, man. Bud's gonna have to take a pay cut, man. Slash that paycheck, get that fight, man. If he wants all-time glory, and we'll see if he's willing to do that, or maybe some angel investor is willing to come and do the fight in the Middle East. Who knows, man? But anyway, it is what it is. Just wanted to give you that update, and with that, I'm out. Deuces.